You were a Manhattan resident. As I said, you clearly see what's happening right now. Luckily, I don't live in, I am a Florida resident and proud to be a Florida resident, but I'm not a South Florida resident anymore. And I know quite a few of the affluent who probably already have a condo or a beach house somewhere along A1A in either Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, or Miami. You know, they're just going to spend more time there than they normally would in New York and probably claim permanent residence and only be there part of the year in New York. Point is, there is this fear, this concern about the socialist supposedly taking over New York. And what
I think he's a socialist. I think we can trust him when he says that he's a socialist.
I would believe that Zohran is probably pretty forthcoming about who he is. But what cannot be denied is that this meeting that these two had the other day was clearly very impactful. Now, we all listen, if you've met him, I met him once years ago. He's a really interesting person, but here's what I'll tell you. If you just tell me how great I am and how I'm making America great again, he loves flattery. It's Trump. Good. Yeah, no, but that's his modus operandi. Trump is all about business, and he loves people who congratulate him and appreciate him. And I have no doubt that Zohran made quite an impression over the last 24 hours. And the fact of the matter is, he probably was very direct with him and very honest. He didn't ask for too much. He just said, look, I want to make New York City a better place to live. Your home. Yeah, and it probably charmed the shit out of him, and it worked. How do you think things went down the other day?
I only saw a couple clips of this, including the one that was just sort of like just amazing, where, you know, some reporters like, so do you think President Trump's a fascist? And he's like, oh, you can just say yes. It's fine. Just say yes.
So do you want to call me a despot? That's fine. I don't really mind it. It's a rose off the back.
You know, the funny thing is, and I've done a bunch of videos on Mr. Mamdani, as you know, and I've met the president very briefly. Although, you know, I will say I used to wait tables in Atlantic City at Trump Marina when I was going to college. So I actually used to see Trump run it back and forth in the late 90s while I was waiting tables at the midnight shift. You know, Trump's not an ideological guy. He's just not. I think your depiction of his personality is exactly accurate. He is won over by flattery. He likes winners. He likes personality. He likes showmen. So these two guys that, you know, pictured here, they have all that in common. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, that doesn't produce outcomes. That's just good politics. And like, I voted for Trump. It was, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm not happy about, and there's stuff that I am happy about. But I think I can't get past the whole, like, are your ideas going to work? And I think when it comes to Mr. Mamdani, his ideas are terrible. His diagnosis is great in the sense that, like, he actually was talking about the punishing cost of living crisis going on in New York City. But his ideas won't work even if implemented. And I'm sort of divided between hoping he gets to do everything he wants versus hoping that he doesn't get to do any. Having lived in New York City, I can tell you, in fact, I very briefly lived in a rent-controlled apartment. I think it's like half of the rentals in New York City are rent-controlled. And he's like, we're going to freeze the rents. Okay. Well, what most people don't know that heard that is that all you do is shift the cost to another margin. And what that margin is political connections. So how did I get in that place? Because I was working at MTV. I was young. I was making no money. But a buddy of mine who was a New York native, he got in, and I subletted the sublet to get in. It was just a who you know scam. Charlie Rangel, the former congressman of New York, had 4 rent-controlled apartments under his control. That's all you do. When you say, I'm going to cap the price, it's no different than when the PlayStation 6 comes out and they put it at $5.99 and you can't find one. The price emerges somewhere else. And the problem is when you do that, and this is just plain old econ, and I know people are going to be like, shut up, but it's just all you're doing is you're preventing people from building more housing. You know, my buddy Josh It took him 6 frigging months to put up a non-load bearing wall to convert his junior 4 apartment into a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn. 6 months of building inspectors and approvals and the condo board and back to the and like he went to the office of the building inspector and they said, you need to bring the forms. He's like, well, do you have the forms? And they're like, no, we don't have the forms. I'm like, well, where do I get the forms? There's actually a cart out front that sells the forms for us. I mean, and so again, it's sort of like saying it's all about profit. None of that shit's gonna work. Freeze the rent's going to make it worse along every single dimension.
All right, so I'll ask you a question. You know who John, much better, again, I grew up with Italians my whole life. I'm usually better at pronouncing Italian names than I am Greek names. And John Katsimatidis. Okay, so you know who he is.
Owner of Gristedes?
Yes. So he's a multi-billionaire, and he is somebody who has been on
he's a big
radio
Republican
show,
right winger.
Radio show of a person that I knew pretty well back in the day, Sid Rosenberg, and clearly today he and I would never speak again for obvious reasons. He would constantly put down Zohran, saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. The one policy that I actually think could work that Zohran is preaching is the single government-run grocery store in each of the 5 boroughs. And I use John's methods as an example as to why this is something that's going to come to the forefront. And I think if Zohran is smart, if he wants to get one policy through and get it through fast, this is the one. It has been reported forever that John completely takes for granted his employees, treats them terribly, underpays them, and he completely price gouges the shit out of his clientele. So if you bring in this concept of a government-run grocery store, naturally, anyone's going to look at that and say, well, how could that possibly work? Well, it'll work to this degree. If you go into one of John's supermarkets and he's charging $12 for a dozen eggs, but then you go into one of these, we'll say, what would be considered a part of Manhattan where people are struggling, maybe some parts of the Lower East Side, obviously the Bronx.
Yeah. Avenue D, whatever.
So let's say
all of Manhattan's out of reach now at this point, but regardless.
So let's say we just stick it there for argument's sake,
sure.
somewhere on the East Line away from the Holland Tunnel. But the point is, if you're going to put it anywhere, you put it somewhere there where people desperately need it. But then people all of a sudden see, oh, how come that grocery store is getting a dozen eggs for $3? What exactly is going on here? Well, that's leveling the playing field of the free market as far as I'm concerned. Now, you don't need to turn everybody's grocery store into a government-run chain. But what you do need to do is recognize that if the cost of living has gotten to the point that people simply cannot afford to survive, and food's very important, if this is going to help level the playing field, and it's not going to allow people that are living in different boroughs to have to come to Manhattan. If it's the Bronx, if it's Queens, if it's even in Staten Island, I know Staten Island won't be too fond of it, but point is, if there is an opportunity to control at least, well, not even control is not the right word because everyone thinks it's a control thing. No, it is actually creating more competition, as you were alluding to earlier. If you want people to shop at your store, well, it's going to be very hard, John Katsimatidis, to get people to buy your $12 eggs when someone else is selling it for $3. If they were selling it for $10.50, yeah, they might just happen to like your store and they're going to come there. If it's $3, not happening. They will jump on the train for 2 hours to get to that grocery store in order to go shop there. Now you could say, oh, well, the lines will be crazy. Yeah, they might be. But at the end of the day,
there's a much simpler issue here because grocery store profit margins are like 1% to 2%.
Yeah, they're small. They're pretty thin.
Right? So the thing that drives food prices is inflation, first and foremost. It's weather and it's inflation. It is commodities. So the price of eggs is set, I mean, I did a documentary about the way animals are raised for food, and I spent 6 months crossing 26 states, meeting with farmers large and small. It was about sort of the ethics of it. I mean, I think most people would see this film and think of it like something on the left. It's very open-hearted about animal welfare, which is a luxury good. That's really at the end of the day. If you're worried about putting food on the table for your family, I don't think you give two flying, F's about how well the chickens are treated. But the reason why you go to Whole Foods and you see cage-free eggs or pasture-raised eggs where the chickens get to move around outside, and they're $7.99, $8.99, and like the carton of eggs at the gas station in the foam, not the nice cardboard, but the good old foam crate, are $3.99 a dozen. That's because one of them is made on a massive assembly line in Iowa. That's high productivity, and one is not. One is low productivity, and the amount of margin in these things is tiny. So if Zohran wants to set up some city-run grocery stores, I think that's stupid. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. That's not really socialism. That's just government getting into a business it probably has no business getting into. You could say, well, that's a public option. Okay. It's just the profit margins on these things are just so slim. It's just it's not going to be the choice between that. In fact, the profit margins are so slim that the differences between being like a good operator that knows how to run the thing, knows how to maintain proper inventory that balances what people need. Food expires on the shelf unless it's canned goods, right? Or dry goods. So if you're not good at that, you'll blow through that 1-2% profit margin just in food waste on the shelves if you're not good at managing all that stuff. And so again, I know, like, I'm looking at the comments are like, dad's destroying America. That's fine. I understand. I'm not a guy that panders. I am what I am. I think what I think. But
let me ask you this, since obviously you and I could probably talk for hours, and I'm sure we'll grab a coffee at some point when we're
it'll be great.
Has capitalism failed? Has capitalism failed America? How about that?
Well,
you have to be able to be, and I'm asking you this because you have to be able, this is something that I've tried explaining to people that I know that are successful like you. It's difficult at times when capitalism has done right by you to be able to take a step back from it and say, but is it really something that is plausible for most people? Is it plausible that the average person can truly succeed in this system? And as somebody who is in a position right now personally, where I may be in a position to be doing pretty well, potentially, I can never lose sight of how difficult it is, not just to catch the break, especially if you don't have any of that guidance or assistance to get there, but that the system in general, forget how bad it's gotten over the last several years, but in general, this is a system that is designed for very few people to succeed in. And I'm wondering if you feel the same way.
Well, I guess this is you've asked, has capitalism failed? I would say this: the American political economic system is breaking down for a lot of people. I do believe that. I wouldn't call what we have now capitalism. We have an extremely mixed economy. And that sets up the question of which part of the mix, is it the eggs or the flour that's made the mix suck, has made it too thick to swallow. I think that when you look at the fact that the percentage of 30-year-olds who are married and own a home has gone from over 50% in like 1980 to below 15% today, I don't see how you can look at that and say, oh, that's an economic and political system that's healthy and working and delivering intergenerational progress. No, that's a system that is a whole picture of a society that, from my perspective, is going in the wrong direction.
I look at different policies that were passed over the years. I do believe that if there is a proper way to tax the rich, I believe there's only one way to do it, and that is a top marginal tax rate. It's what worked during FDR through JFK, and then obviously we saw what happened under Reagan. I believe that, like any market, when things are going good, you increase taxes. When things are going bad, you reduce taxes. Reagan came in and reduced the top marginal rate from 72 down to 50. I believe he should have held it. And probably if it stayed at 50% as it would be today, which is where it probably should be, I think a lot of the problems probably wouldn't exist. Now, there were many other things that took place over that time. But I personally believe, in terms of actual policy that was passed in the United States, there is no worse president than Bill Clinton. In fact, I can recite all 5 policies that I passed that absolutely ruined America. I did NAFTA. I did normal trade relations with China. I did the crime bill. I did the Telecom Act. And then probably the worst policy that has been passed, not just during my administration, but maybe over the last century, is the removal of Glass-Steagall. And to me, if I were to say universally, it's at least on the domestic side, the worst president, foreign policy-wise, in my lifetime, bar none, is George Bush. And the fact that all of these shit libs, as I like to call them, showed up at Cheney's funeral just goes to show you, as Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. But as far as the policies that were passed, perhaps capitalism would be working for a hell of a lot more people. There would be much more of a balancing act if we didn't go through these periods that we've went through over the last 2 generations. And I believe at this point, more than any other reason, why socialism, and dare I say communism, is looking attractive to a lot of young people is because they're now bearing the weight of these policies that were based solely on greed and nothing more, is why we're here. Now, maybe we could have changed things for the better in some respects, but if I'm looking at any reason why it's failing, I do believe that the policies in particular that Clinton passed, it contributed quite a bit.